Number one was Judge Tubby Price, who was a prominent judge in Miami at the time, played in the outfield. Louis McReynolds, also the team's best hitter. Louis later would be the Miami commissioner of the Miami Boxing Commission. And during the 30s, he would organize several high-profile bouts in Miami. I mean, big-time fights. And the guy who I find most interesting on this team is in the bottom left corner, is Icy Bandreimer. Now, I don't know if you guys, anybody went to the games during the mid-50s to Miami Stadium. Icy was kind of the, he wasn't hired by the team, but he was the team greeter. Not officially, but he greeted fans as they came in. And people had no idea, unless they knew Icy, what a treasure he was in baseball history in Miami. But just to give you a little background on Icy, as a young man, he always wanted to be a baseball player. He was a bat boy for the 1914 Philadelphia Athletics in Jacksonville Rays. To earn extra money, he fought in Guy's Pool Hall for $1 for every 4 rounds and $2 if he went 6 rounds. And if the patrons enjoyed the fight, they would throw silver dollars into the ring. And that's how he made his money. But what he found out one day, he got his lip split in a fight. And so he said, I've had enough of this. And he was a young man, but he was full of wanderlust. So what he did is he approached the 2nd Florida Infantry, and he was too young to be in the military. But he was such an energetic and positive guy that they brought him along as part of the expedition force that went to Laredo, Texas. And it was the same units that were chasing down Pancho Villa. So from there, he became a merchant marine, traveled around the world to all kinds of exotic locations, but he wanted to come back to his dream. He wanted to be a ball player. So when he returned to Miami in 1920, he tried out for the Miami Magicians, earned a spot as a middle infielder, and became one of the most popular players, if not the most popular player. He was a scrappy guy. He was very intense in his makeup. He was known to get in more than a few scraps with umpires, infielders, and fans, but the fans loved him, just loved him. So basically, he was one of the stars on the 1920 team. And in 1921, he came back for a 2nd season. The team didn't fare as well, nor did the league. And once again, the Florida East Coast League folded up. Let's see if we get to the next one here. Not going. Oh, went too fast. Hold on a second.
Gotta get back in the presentation.
Sorry about this. What I wanted to bring out this is going to be the Miami Hustlers that start in 1927. But in there we go. In 1925, oh, this is a picture, by the way. Oh, go to this one. This is a picture of the original, well, I should say the 1921 Miami Magicians. Right up there, the heavier set guy is Tubby Price. This is Icy right here. Great guy. Let's see if we can. In between, when the next team would start up, Flamingo Park, the diamond was laid down there in 1925. Eventually, the grandstands would be built in the 1930s, and they too had a vision of bringing professional baseball to Miami Beach. And they made a deal with the New York Giants, and the Giants came down and did their spring training in the mid-30s. And many years later, other teams would also use Flamingo Park. And by the way, Flamingo Park is still there to this day.
Yes.
Mhm. So now we roll around to 1927. And once again, the Florida East Coast League and the Miami Baseball Association is at work. And they form the third, I make a correction. The Miami Baseball Association was going to start the Florida East Coast League, but they instead were approached by the Florida State League, which was a officially sanctioned minor league. And they had a team that was struggling in Bradenton, the Bradenton Growers. They wanted to expand their borders. They saw Miami as an excellent choice to increase attendance. And so they made a deal, and the Hustlers joined the Florida State League in 1927. Well, it was a season of two, I'm going to say, from worst to first. Okay, the Florida State League did things a little different. They played what they called a split season. They would have the first half champions meet the second half champions. And so the Hustlers did very poorly in the first half. So team management went out and they recruited a gentleman by the name of Cotton Knock. Now, Cotton was, he played in the big leagues for the Cleveland Indians for a couple of seasons. He also was a legend in the Southern Association, playing for New Orleans. And he had a lot of connections in baseball. And what Cotton did as soon as he came to Miami is he completely reworked the team. New players, he kept a couple prior players, but basically he rebuilt the team. And to make a long story short, they won the second half for the right to play the Orlando Colts for the Florida State League Championship. It was a hotly contested series, but in the end, Orlando won the best-of-7 series, 4-3. And in 1928, they come back again. Cotton is no longer there. He moves on to greener grass. And the 1928 team struggles. 1928 was a tough year in Florida. That was the year of the Okeechobee hurricane. A lot of crops were ruined by the hurricane. Over 2,000 people died and thousands of people were left homeless by this hurricane. The league was already kind of on the verge of financial collapse. And so after the 28th season, they closed down. And Miami, actually, they did not finish the season, but Miami did play a series of exhibition games at the end of the year against Tampa, which was in another league, and actually played fairly well against an established minor league team. Okay, so for 12 years, basically Miamians had spring training, amateur baseball, and semi-pro baseball. But in 1940, again, the Florida Coast League is formed, this time as a officially sanctioned minor league. And on the upper left, you'll see the Miami Wahoos. And this time we have two teams in Miami, also the Miami Beach Flamingos. Okay. Now, Miami brings in a manager by the name of Max Carey. And if baseball fans know Max Carey, he's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He took over the club. And Miami Beach, a major leaguer who's less well known, but who had retired from baseball, Max, let's see, his name was Fred Hymick, I'm sorry, took over and managed the Miami Beach Flamingos. One of the key guys, though, on the Miami Beach Flamingos was Max Rosenfeld, who was the best hitter and had played previously in the major leagues for the Brooklyn Dodgers. So Max had a lot of experience. And the first 2 years, the Wahoos didn't fare very well, but Miami Beach did. And they had a real good team in 40 with Max, and they had a pitcher by the name of Gene Bearden, who was their star pitcher. And Gene would later go on to pitch for the Cleveland Indians and help them win the 1948 World Series. But this time he was just a young man trying to get ahead in the minor leagues. Next year, 41, Max takes over as a player and a manager and continues to be the team's leading hitter. But he discovers a young recruit to go along with Gene Bearden. One day, a young man walks by his garage. He's carrying a glove, and he stops to talk to him. And this man's name was Milt Rosenstein. They later called him Rosie. And Milt Rosenstein had come from New York to try to catch on with the New York Giants and some other clubs, but unfortunately no one showed any interest in him. So Max developed a conversation with him, saw that the kid was talented after he evaluated him, and signed him to the Miami Beach Flamingos. Well, this turned out to be very fortuitous, because Max would team up with Gene Bearden. Gene, I think, won 18 games that year, and Milt won over 20 games. He was extremely talented. He had already had a background in baseball. He had pitched for Socrates AC in New York, which was a kind of like a semi-pro barnstorming team. So the league tries to launch in 42, but because of World War II and the man shortage, it just wasn't going to be. And what happens is most of the minor leagues around the country shut their doors for the duration of World War II. Let's see here. And what comes next is actually the last rebirth of the Florida East Coast League, except with a twist. They renamed the league the Florida International League. And why do you think they did that? Exactly. For the first time, an American league, I should say an American minor league, took in a team south of the border. And thus why they named it the Florida International League, a team from Havana. Now, what made this league so special was that because you had to fly across some water in the Caribbean, teams would fly chartered flights to the games. And basically the league consisted of the Tampa Smokers, St. Petersburg Saints, West Palm Beach Indians, Lakeland was the Flying Tigers. You had Miami, Miami Beach, Havana. These were the teams that made up the league. The first year there were 6 teams, but they expanded to 8 by 1947. So the top 2 pictures you can see on the left, this was the first team to travel by chartered flight as a minor league team, the Miami Beach Flamingos, and the team in the middle is the, they were in 1946, the Miami Sun Sox, but they had a temporary name change from 1947 to 48, and they became the Taurus. You can see a picture here of Bill Enos in the top right corner with his Sun Sox uniform. Bill was known as the ballerina of the bag. He was such a great defensive first baseman. They said he moved like a ballerina. So that's the Sun Sox uniform. In 1947, a prominent baseball name comes into play in Miami Beach, and his name is Joe Ryan. For the next 40 years, he will be involved with baseball, I would say, at the way in the forefront, and as a general manager and even as a team owner. And he takes over the Flamingos in 1947, running the team. I do want to mention there was a young and upcoming PA announcer for the Miami Tourists by the name of G. Holmes Braddock. Well, we had a nice conversation last time at the meeting, and he was telling me about his experiences with the tourists. Also, I want to jump to 1949 because 1949 is a critical year in the Florida International League and Florida baseball. First of all, in 1949, the Sun Sox, now they're called the Sun Sox again, and the Miami Beach Flamingos hired 2 new managers. The first one for the Sun Sox, they hire Pepper Martin, a gentleman by the name of Joe Medwick, who was a baseball Hall of Famer. Now, these two have a connection, and this is when the Miami Beach, Miami Sun Sox rivalry really heats up. They both were members in the 1930s for what they called the St. Louis Cardinals Gas House Gang. Very different type of player. Joe Medwick kind of was a guy with an ego. He was very proper, whereas Pepper Martin was a fiery individual, a teetotaler, very religious man. He was into the outdoors, but he had this intense desire. He just had to win at any cost, within reason. And so what happens is there's a rivalry between the two, and the teams really butt heads, and they will butt heads for the next 5 seasons. I also want to mention that in 49, my father-in-law, Emilio Cabrera, was a catcher. He was in the Florida International League, played 6 seasons, and this picture actually shows Pepper in a Miami Beach uniform, but we'll get to that later. But he played for Joe Medwick in Miami Beach. And just so a little bit of Miami history, his name is Emilio Cabrera. He started the first organization for the children of exiles from Cuba. in Miami. It was the first league that helped the kids, taught them values, and put the kids, basically kept the kids off the street. So many of these kids, it changed their lives. And if you ever get a chance, there's a wonderful website by Abelio Perez, and he tells you the history of Los Cubanitos. And it's really a special thing. There was kids that went on to play college ball, minor league ball, and even made it to the major leagues. Orlando Gonzalez, and some of you probably know Freddie Gonzalez was a Los Cubanitos, who went on to a pretty good managerial career. But in 1949, like I said, the rivalry really heats up. But Miami has a special gift. This gentleman on the bottom left, Jose Alemán Jr., is gifted a stadium, and they built Miami Stadium and finish it in August of 1949. At the time, it was considered the state-of-the-art ballpark, and I'm sure some of you remember it had that beautiful cantilever roof. There was no beams in the park that blocked your view. In 1949, they had a club upstairs where you could take the elevator, and they served alcohol. It was really a special ballpark. And also, the Sun Sox got a special boost. They became affiliated with the Brooklyn Dodgers. What this did is it guaranteed that they had a steady stream of top quality players coming into the system. Up till now, the league had been dominated by the Havana Cubans, and in a lesser extent, the Tampa Smokers. The Cubans had won the last 4 pennants, and the Smokers and the Cubans had just each won 2 league titles during those 4 years. That's about to change, because in 1950, the Sun Sox won the league championship. And they have just a bevy of talent that pours in there. I'm going to jump ahead to 1952. And what happens is in 51, Pepper Martin is fired by the Sun Sox for his antics on the field. Mainly, he had gotten into so many scraps with fans and players, and even was choked an umpire in Havana during a game. So I think the Sun Sox basically ran out of patience with him. But Joe Ryan, the genius he was, said, I'm going to hire him and be our manager. And so he went over to the Flamingos, and it was really a shot in the arm the team needed. The Sun Sox, just to give you an idea, had some very talented players that came up through the system. During that 50 season, Chico Hernandez was a shortstop. Dick Gray played third base. Max Macon played first base. He was the player manager. He had a great record as a minor league manager. And the previous year, he had managed the Hazard Bombers to over 100 wins. But Joe Ryan was a shrewd judge of talent himself. And Joe Ryan made some major moves. Besides Pepper Martin coming in to take over the club, he signed ex-major leaguer Whitey Platt, who was from West Palm Beach, had played for the Browns and the White Sox in the American League. He signed Jesse Levin, L-E-V-A-N. He had won batting titles in the minor leagues. And he also signed an aging pitcher who would prove to be invaluable by the name of Dave Barnhill. Okay, with Dave Barnhill, who he is he had pitched and was a star in the Negro Leagues for a few years. He had a blazing fastball, and he had not only played in the Negro Leagues, he had barnstormed with Satchel Paige. And the guy was only like 5'6" and weighed 140 pounds, but he threw as hard as Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige, of course, one of the greatest pitchers that ever lived. So in 1951, Dave Barnhill's in the Pacific Coast League. His manager is Mel Ott, another Hall of Famer. And he goes to Mel and he says, you know, Skip, my arm's gone. It's so sore. He says, I can't help the club anymore. So Mel Ott gives him his release. And Barnhill, who's from Miami, returns. He's familiar with Miami, having played for the Miami Giants, the Zulu Giants, and the Ethiopian Clowns. He gets together with Joe Ryan, and I don't know, for some reason, his arm gets a lot better in 1952. So Joe Ryan signs him, and he turns out to be one of the best pitchers in the league. Some of you may not know Dave Barnhill's history later, but he actually worked for the city of Miami Parks and Recreations for several years after he retired from baseball. But he was an amazing talent. So these two clubs get in the most heated race in the Florida International League history. Both clubs win over 100 games, and the season goes down to the last game. And basically, the Sun Sox win the last game of the season, and they're the pennant winners. However, the pennant was actually decided by a clerical problem. Earlier in the season, towards the end of the year, the Flamingos were playing the Sun Sox in a critical game, and Joe Ryan activated a player by the name of Nabi Rosa. He had been on suspension because he had been basically for insubordination. Well, league rules stated if you activated a player to play that game, that you had to inform the league office before the game started. So they bring Nabi in, and the Flamingos win the game 5-2. Well, Jerry Waring, who's the general manager of the Sun Sox, says, wait, I think there's something going on here. Joe Ryan has been pulling a few things during the season. He checks into it, and the league office goes, well, we didn't receive any notification until 9:36 in the evening. Joe Ryan says, no, I sent it in. If that's the case, then you guys didn't accept it. Well, it went to the league president, they reviewed it, and the ruling was that indeed Joe Ryan had sent it late, and they forfeited the game and gave it to the Sun Sox. So basically, at the end of the year, if that game had not been turned around, the Flamingos would have won the pennant. All because of a clerical mistake. So what happens? The Flamingos and the Sun Sox play for the league title, and the Sun Sox win the best of 7 series 4-3. The Florida National League by then had come on some hard times, and the league actually would shut its doors in 1954, early in the season. However, Pepper Martin essentially took the club to Fort Lauderdale. They moved it because of financial reasons, and the title he didn't get in 52, he got in 53 with the Fort Lauderdale club. And most of the good portion of the players that were on the 52 team were on the 53 team. And here's where it gets really exciting. AAA baseball comes to Miami. And this came in kind of a roundabout way. Bill Beck, and I'm sure some of the baseball people out there know who Bill Beck is. He was the marketing genius. When you go to games today, you see all the promotions the team does, fireworks, you know, what goes on in the field and everything. He gets in touch with Sid Solomon. And Sid Solomon is in Columbus, Ohio, and he's closing a business deal. And he's in a restaurant. And this is according to Bill Beck in his book, Beck is in Rec. And Sid Solomon is with his business partner, Elliot Stein. And at the same time, minor league baseball is having their national meetings in Columbus. Little does he know, sitting next to him is Martin Haskey, the owner of the Syracuse Chiefs. And what happens is Haskey's listening in on the conversation. Solomon he's dying to get to buy a team. Somebody in the minor leagues. He wants to get a start in sports. And he's saying, you know, the American Association was considering Miami as a site and they turned it down. And he says, I don't understand this. This is the greatest opportunity. If I could own a team, I'd move them to Miami. Haskey leans over, according to Beck, taps him on the shoulder and says, you got yourself a team. Well, fair enough. They work out a deal, but this is kind of beyond Solomon's scope. So he goes to Bill Beck, goes, I'll help you. And Bill Beck works a deal. They move the Syracuse Chiefs to Miami. And thus we have the original Miami Marlins in 1956. So Bill Beck immediately jumps into his bag of tricks and promotes the team. Opening day is a big gala. They play the Buffalo Bisons. But there's a surprise for the fans. There's a lot of entertainment, including they have a tightrope walker, fireworks, the lights go out, and they announce the players, all this. But the fans notice that there's a helicopter circling the stadium. And they don't know what's going on. Of course, with Bill Beck, you never knew what to expect. This helicopter circles, lowers down and lands. And there's some debate whether it was behind the home plate or behind the infield. Dust is blowing out everywhere. And the fans get dirty, especially the women, they're all in their beautiful white dresses. And out tops a tall black man on the helicopter. And then the fans realize who it is, it's Satchel Paige. Now, Bill Beck hadn't told any of the players. The only people that knew were front office and manager Don Osborne. And actually, Don Osborne was opposed to Satchel playing on the team. So what happened here is Don Osborne made a deal with Beck. And Beck said, you line up your best 9 players, and if anybody gets a hit off Satchel, then you don't have to have him come join the club. Okay. And he had done this before in 1948 with Lou Boudreau and the Cleveland Indians. Lou was a little resistant in signing Satchel Paige at 42 years old when they did the same stunt. So anyway, Satchel faces 9 batters, puts them down like nothing. Nobody gets a hit. Now you have to remember Satchel Paige is 49 years old now. He's going to turn 50 this season. So of course, this is a picture on the top left. He goes out and he sits in the bullpen. More famously, as the season goes on, he'll be sitting in a rocking chair in the bullpen. But so Satchel Paige becomes a star. And you know, I mentioned earlier we have a piece of Miami baseball history sitting in the back. A young man was the original Miami Marlins bat boy, Tim Magno. And I have to tell you, when I wrote my books, Tim was actually the first person I ever interviewed when I wrote my first book, The Forgotten Marlins. And it was probably my most memorable interview, Tim. Thank you. So Satchel Paige becomes part of the club, and it wasn't a gimmick. He becomes one of the top pitchers on the team, if not the best pitcher. And the Marlins have a good season. They start winning games, but they're lagging a little bit in the standings. So they go out and as Beck would always do, he's looking for a player to help boost the team. And he finds a Miami legend on the bottom. It's going to be on the bottom left, the gentleman in the front, Forrest Woody Smith. He would become a Miami baseball icon. And he would play for the original Marlins all of those seasons. He was in Havana at the time, but he wasn't happy. And so Bill Beck made a deal with the Sugar Kings and brought him to Miami, and it turned out to be very fortuitous for Miami. So as the season wore on,
Sam, before you switch to another slide, I want to point out in the picture of the team,
yeah,
there's an autograph, Leroy Page, that's kind of darker than the other ones. It's the first one in the center. That's Satchel Paige. Look immediately to the right.
yeah, Satchel's head is superimposed.
Yeah. And the signature next to Satchel Paige, there's a 12-year-old kid trying to do penmanship, good penmanship.
Yeah,
That's my signature.
isn't that cool? Now we're going to get into another great moment, and Tim was there also, was the famous Orange Bowl game. Bill Beck organized the game and shoehorned a baseball field into the Orange Bowl, raised money, and I don't remember the name of the dairy association. Do you remember, Tim? It was the proceeds for the game went to the
Milan Dairy.
might have been, yeah, that sounds familiar. And over 50,000 tickets were sold. People came out, they had entertainment at the game. Cab Calloway was there, Margaret Whiting, Merv Griffin. They had Dixieland bands playing, but the stadium was really too small for baseball, so they made special accommodations. Most of down the left and right field line, it was like 200 and some feet. So they made rules that you had to hit it over a certain area, so it would count as a home run or a double. I remember Bob Bowman said that he played so shallow that he should have played in the infield. That's how small it was. And so it was the highest actual embodies in a minor league game in the history of the game. There was actually a game where they sold more tickets in New Jersey City, but the fans and the actual stands did not match to what they had in the Orange Bowl. I think the final attendance count came up to over 51,000. And it was truly amazing. The fun thing about the game is Satchel Paige pitched against Bob Kuzova of the Columbus Jets. And Satchel told Beck, he goes, "I'm not flying in on a helicopter." So he pitched the game. He also had a key hit, a double, which Tim said should have been at least a triple, but Satchel, he moved a little bit slower. 50 years old now. And he had the key hit in the game, and the Marlins won, if I remember right, 5-2, and the game went down in history. Well, following the Marlins did make the playoffs that year, but they're a team that always gave them trouble. I was talking to somebody earlier, the Rochester Red Wings knocked them out of the playoffs. I don't know what it was about the Red Wings, but they had the Marlins number. And so at the close of the season, Sid Solomon Jr., who was the owner of the team, said he had some health issues at the time, and he decided to sell the club to George Storer. Now, I did want to say at the time, the Marlins were a Philadelphia Phillies affiliate, and they would be until 1958. But Solomon and Beck worked out a deal. They sold it to George Storer of WGBS fame. I'm sure you all know about WGBS. And he had every intention of doing well with the Marlins, but there was a lot of issues. The Marlins didn't have a satisfactory stadium lease. It cost them a lot of money. They weren't getting much money from the concessions because the Jacob brothers had a contract that wasn't good for the Marlins. And so right away, they're talking about, well, we're going to move the team unless we get this. And they heard fan support. So by 1959, and the team was experiencing losing records. In 59, they changed to the Baltimore Orioles, which didn't help. And Storer sold the Marlins to Bill McDonald. He gave it a go for a year, but the handwriting was on the wall. And he moved the team to Charleston, well, first to Puerto Rico, then Charleston, West Virginia. And they became the Charleston Marlins, which didn't make any sense, but they attributed to a rifle, was called a Marlin rifle, a hunting rifle. But they were still wearing the old Marlins uniforms. The team was so strapped for money, they had to use the old uniforms. I wanted to mention some names that were associated with the Marlins that were very important. Bill Durney came with Bill Beck from St. Louis. He was a promoter, helped Bill Beck with many of his promotions and became a broadcaster, and he promoted the team strongly. And he had a sidekick on the radio, and you know who that sidekick was?
Sonny Hirsch.
That's right, Sonny Hirsch. So basically, Miami Stadium, other than spring training, goes dark in 61, but in 62, baseball comes back thanks to the efforts of Bill Durney, thanks to the efforts of Ronald Fine, who is an attorney, and an owner who puts up the money named Bill Miranda, a businessman. So once again, they associate with the Philadelphia Phillies, and the first season goes off pretty good. They draw over 90,000 fans, which is at this time for a Class B minor league team is very good. And things look pretty green from there, but quickly again, Miranda becomes disenchanted with the Phillies. He doesn't feel he's getting the talent that he should deserves. The team has losing records in 63, 64, and 65. However, a very famous player comes out of that team who was with the Marlins in 62 and 63. He would go on to have a Hall of Fame career. His name was Ferguson Jenkins.
Wow.
Yeah. So the team after 65, Miranda works out a deal with the Phillies. Say, okay, you can go on your own, and he signs with the Baltimore Orioles to be an affiliate with that club. There's a picture of Ferguson Jenkins. The first manager there, by the way, was Andy Semenuk, a famous Philadelphia Philly. And this is one of my favorite pictures. I put it in there because this is Jerry Messerly. He came up to the Phillies organization. He would have made the Phillies, but he suffered an injury when they were going to call him back. but I love this picture because look at the intensity in his eyes when he's pitching there. And he was one of my more memorable people that I spoke to when I wrote the books. Very interesting guy. 1966 rolls around and the Marlins experience a winning season. Miranda's still not happy, but what is of note of this year is the longest continuous major league game. The Marlins travel to St. Petersburg against Sparky Anderson's St. Petersburg Cardinals. They just think it's a game, you know, any other game, so many games during the season. Well, they get caught up in this 29-inning game that lasts 6 hours and 59 minutes. It goes into 2 days. And there's a lot of subplots in this game. You can read about it in the book if you want, if you're interested in reading about the book. The gentleman on the bottom left, that little picture, Mike Hebert, he would become somewhat of a fixture in Miami pitching for minor league teams. He gets the win in this 29-inning game. How do the Marlins and the Orioles thank him? They ship him off to South Dakota the next season to Aberdeen. The press comes in the next day to get all this. This is an amazing game, and he's gone. Everybody wants to interview Mike Hebert, and he's already left. Another interesting thing that occurred in this game, there's so many subplots in this game. But 2 of the players had played for Elmira the previous year and participated in the game that this game broke the record on. Dick Hickerson and Lloyd Foureau were on the Elmira team that had the record, and then they come to Miami the next year and they break that record with a 29-inning game. What are the odds? Baseball is a small world. 67 proves to be a troublesome season, mainly because of injuries. Bill Miranda sells the club to Robert Peterson, and Robert Peterson names a new general manager. Bill Durney is still with the club, but Bill Durney Jr. is the new general manager. Gee, I wonder how he got that job. But actually, it turns out to be I hate to say this word again, fortuitous hiring, because he proves to be very good at what he does. And he's learned from his dad, and they work together. In 1969, Bill Durney Jr. wants to hire a certain manager to manage the club. Now, the Orioles are notorious as they only promote from within. But Bill Durney Jr. doesn't accept that. He keeps harping on who he wants to hire. And he hires, who do you think he hired to be his manager? With no managerial experience. Woody Smith. So Woody Smith makes his grand return to Miami. And boy, does that work out. The Marlins win 4 consecutive league titles and pennants. The only time it happened in the history of the Florida State League. There was quite a few characters that passed through Miami. On the top left, Jim Fuller, in 1971, when they changed the name from Marlins to Orioles, went on a home run chase. And going into the last season, he was tied with Ed Levy, who had the previous record of 33 home runs in a season. Jim didn't get the record, but he ended up tying the record. But he was an interesting character. He would show up in spring training in his Volkswagen van. He was into health foods. He read from the Bible. He was a very interesting guy. Another guy that was had a lot of influence on Miami baseball, Orlando Pena. He was with the club in 70 and 71 after being just basically released by the Pittsburgh Pirates, but he wasn't ready to give up his career yet. And the Orioles basically told him, you know, we're not going to call you up, but you know, we'll give you a shot. And what happened is he came and he solidified the pitching staff with all the young pitchers they had. He was a mentor. And also he was very effective. He was one of the, if not the best pitcher on the club. And that's him sitting in Miami Stadium there. And there's a few pictures here of the different, you can see the different players. And at the end of the 72 season, Woody Smith gets a call from Don Priest of the front office of the Baltimore Orioles. Woody thinks, well, this is it. I'm finally getting my chance to move up. He goes, if not in the minor leagues, manage a higher level team, the Orioles are going to want me as a coach. So he meets with Don Priest in his home in St. Louis, and he gets the bad news. The Orioles fired him. They said, we don't have any place for you to go. And I have to tell you, and I talked to Woody's wife and his kids, and it was really a bitter blow to him. He had given so much to the city of Miami and the Orioles. It was heartbreaking. Woody would go on to manage the Key West Conchs the next year, but he had some success, but he never had the success like he had in Miami. He was so well thought of by the players. He was really beloved, and he was. I heard from so many of people I spoke with that he was like a father figure to them, and that's how Woody was. He was just the greatest guy. Definitely, he was the Mr. Marlin before Jeff Conine came around. Just an amazing man. Amazing man. You'll see down here on the bottom left, there's a character here, Montague Ha, the guy by the name of Hearst there. He was one of the most comical players to come through Miami. He had an interesting sense of humor. But whenever he pitched the game and he got to the last out of the game, he'd stick his head up and go like this. And the players would go, "Oh, Hearst smells a win." And sure enough, he'd get the last out in the game. And you had other characters that came through here. So we go on. And the Orioles continue to have success through from 73 to 78. They developed a lot of great players. As I can think of Eddie Murray, who became a Hall of Famer. Mike Flanagan, a pitcher, and a pitcher we have with us today who went on to a spectacular career, Dennis Martinez. What? And Dennis was that your first stop in the minors? Was with Miami?
Yeah, 74.
Yeah, and you have Mike, your teammate, right? Mike Flanagan?
Right.
Yeah, and they had a lot of other guys, but I won't go into all the names, but basically the Orioles were loaded back then. So in 1978 would turn out to be the last championship season. You'll see Sonny Hirsch there on the far right in the Hawaiian shirt. He and Joe Ryan would run the club. I think it was for about 10 years total. Joe Ryan owned the club and Sonny worked as the general manager. And he had a big part of the history of Miami baseball. In 1979, Miami has two teams again. Of course, the Miami Orioles, and you'll notice on the second row, the gentleman at not the end, but next to the end on the right, that's Cal Ripken Jr.
Oh,
Pretty fair play. Yeah. But they also had a second team, the Miami Amigos. And this is a league that was the brainchild of Bobby Maduro. He felt that developing a league would open up a door for a lot of Latin American players to make it to the big leagues. The league consisted of one American team, Miami, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Panama, and there was two teams in Venezuela. And of course, Miami, they shared the ballpark with the Orioles. And basically the Amigos were stocked with players with major league experience. However, the league ran in, and you hear this so much in Miami baseball history, the league ran into financial difficulties. In my opinion, they jumped into the league too soon. There was problems with players getting visas. Chartered flights would arrive late. It was very expensive to fly teams around. And eventually the league folded. Bobby wanted to go back and form another one, but it didn't work out, unfortunately. But that's their program and a picture of Miami Stadium. And of course, one of the things that people most remember about the Miami Amigos was the Wendy's girls. Miami Stadium had gone through some difficult times. And of course, by the summer of '80, you had the McDuffie riots and the National Guard at Miami Stadium around the city. But on a hot summer night in 1980, a man by the name of Jose Tomas comes into the stadium, attempts to kill somebody, almost does, tries to run from the stadium. Two Good Samaritans chase Tomas, And he turns around and murders those two fans. And it was really, as I guess Howard Kleinberg said it best, from that point onward, the baseball stadium was a place to be avoided. Very sad. I remember the story of Mike Young. He said that when he was roaming the outfield, and he turned around and he saw a man out in the outfield with an automatic weapon and started running in right in the middle of the game. And it turned out that the umpires, it was one of the National Guardsmen who was just watching the baseball. So basically this really was pretty much the death knell of Miami Stadium and minor league baseball. And when you approach the lean years, the Marlins don't, they go from Orioles back to Marlins again. And other than a brief affiliation with the San Diego Padres in '83 and '84, the team doesn't do well in the standings. And they, by 1988, they actually moved the team out of Miami Stadium to Hialeah. And then, according to baseball experts, the team is dead at that point. However, a man comes along by the name of Marvin Goldklang and surprises everybody. He buys the team with a group of investors that included Bill Murray and Jimmy Buffett. They launched the team again in '89 at FIU's baseball stadium. The first night, attendance figures vary. They said anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 people come. They actually win their first game, but the team goes into a nosedive the rest of the season. They don't have any major league affiliation. They go to other teams to get players who loan players to them. The players are what they call suspects, not prospects. They're on their last legs. If they don't prove themselves, they're out of baseball, and the team struggles. The team moves to Pompano Beach in 1990. They keep the moniker Miami Miracle. And they're taken over by a gentleman by the name of Mike Veck, who's Bill Veck's son. He's a chip off the old block, and he starts doing the same promotions. And they actually see a jump in attendance. The team doesn't do that badly in Pompano. Their manager for the end of the '90 and '91 season, he got his break in baseball, was Freddie Gonzalez. This was his first team managing. And you can see some of the players. Probably the best player to come out of the Miracle was Mike Lansing there in the middle. I just wanted to show you this picture of some of the people who are important to baseball. That's Smiley Tatum on the top left, Joe Ryan. There's a picture of Bill Durney on the right when he was with the St. Louis Browns and Bill Veck. Of course, everybody knows Sonny Hirsch. I threw in Pepper because not only did Pepper manage in the Florida International League for a few years, he also came back in '59 and managed the Miami Marlins. And of course, on the bottom, you'll see him as kind of an angle there, picture of Mike Veck. And the team after '91, they moved to Fort Myers. What turned out to be a great deal though for the Goldklang group is they were fortunate enough to buy the territorial rights to Miami, and they made a nice chunk of change when the Florida Marlins started. So I want to open the, yeah. Oh, yes, thank you. Well, Miami Stadium unfortunately got demolished. However, Miami Stadium won't be forgotten because of a gentleman who's with us here today, Abel Sanchez. He started a grassroots effort for Dade. And there's a plaque. If you go down to the corner of Northwest, correct me if I'm wrong, Abel, Northwest 23rd Street and 10th Avenue? Correct. Yeah, it has a brief history of Miami Stadium.
Thanks to him.
Thanks to Abel, yeah. And if you get a chance, go down. Yes, ma'am.
Last use as a shelter for refugees, wasn't it?
Yes, yes, it was. I don't recall your disabled year.
It was over at the time of Marielle, by
Yeah.
In the 80s.
I think a lot of refugees, 89, 90.
Yeah.
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 That was the Orange Bowl.
And they demolished the stadium in 2001. It's very sad, the history of Miami Stadium.
Yeah, Miami Stadium, they also had concerts and they had roller derby. I
Yes,
remember they would set up the roller derby by around where the home plate area would be.
Well, Jose Aliman, who owned the stadium early, which was gifted to him by his father. He owned, and I kind of missed that as I went through the presentation. But he was gifted the stadium by his father and ownership of the Sun Sox. But that was one of the things he did as a promotion, while the original Marlins were even playing there, was they had roller derby in the stadium, amongst other things.
Yeah, we
Because
went,
they had to make money, I mean.
Well, they had spring training there too, for many years.
Many years for the Orioles, yes.
My kids got a lot of balls out there.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody was there, yeah, most of the time.
Well, I think they drew pretty well for spring training, but during the season, it was a rough go.
Yeah.
And you know, it's so sad because Joe Ryan and Sonny Hirsch worked so hard and had so many excellent promotions, but the area just had gotten a bad rep by then.
Do you have any history on Miami Shores baseball around the thirties? My relative, George Sisler, was a manager there.
You know, I do not. I know that during the thirties, Miami reverted back to semi-pro and amateur baseball. There wasn't any professional baseball there. I know that some of the players who played like on the, for instance, 27 Hustlers, 28 Hustlers were from the Miami area and they played amateur ball right through the Depression.
Then they had a good solid amateur baseball here during the thirties. And all, and through the war, Al Rosen, before he went into the Navy, in World War II, Al Rosen played shortstop there, in Island Harbor. Very good, solid amateur baseball league. But that's the the fast pitch softball, they come in by that time.
Mhm.
And that was become the topic.
Well, one thing that was interesting about the Florida International League is a lot of players migrated to Florida because they had served in the military during the war. And why play up north where it's cold when you can come to Miami and enjoy the warm weather and the outdoors? And so even though the Florida National League was a Class B designation, in my studies, I think it was closer to A1, maybe even a little better. There was a lot of players who had major league experience that ended up there, players that were going up, especially from the Cubans, that when we made it to the big leagues.
They had Colorado Marrero and Sandy.
Rogelio Martinez, Anthony Stone.
Sam, I wanted to make the record clear now and straighten it out.
Okay,
There is no question where the helicopter landed. Dispute that's in your book, the first book. Some of the players said they thought it landed on the pitcher's mound and I'm 1,000% sure. It landed in short outfield, short right center field. And then the dust from the helicopter completely enshrouded the helicopter, so you couldn't even see it. But the infield dust had been torn up by the helicopter blades. And that's where Satchel Paige comes staggering out of. I remember it vividly because I was in the third base dugout, saw the whole thing as it was happening, had no clue who Satchel Paige was, had no idea it was gonna happen. But I'm definitely 1,000% sure that it happened in short outfield, not anywhere in the infield, but the blades did tear up the infield dust and created that dust storm that occurred.
and didn't Beck pay for the dry cleaning bills for the ladies? Isn't that true?
That's right, I remember this also very vividly, that the dust started going towards the stands.
Uh-huh.
And the people were all dressed up because it was opening night. They were wearing, the men were wearing suits, the women were wearing these beautiful gowns and everything. And the dust started to go in the stands and I could hear them swearing. From the third base dugout, I could hear all the cuss words. As the dust went into the stands. Vivid memory of it, 100% sure I'm right. I also wanted to publicly thank you because I get a letter in the mail. Would you like to, you wanted to interview me about the old Miami Marlins? And it gave me the opportunity, Sam, to relive probably one of the finest and most exciting times in my life. So I went over all those stories and everything we did for the first book. And I just appreciate so much that that happened.
Well, thank you. If you go through the book, a lot, Tim was a major contributor, not only to the first one, but also the second one. Yeah, yes, Bob.
Yeah, I'd be interested in your take on how the Miami Marlins franchise was able to turn it around from all those stops and starts through your great history
Uh-huh.
that you cataloged. They suddenly became a viable franchise for a major league team, what, 92, I guess. You know, after all
93 was
those
their first year.
bad times.
Mhm.
What would be, what do you think turned it around? Because it's, it's been done okay.
Well, there was always a call over the years that fans wanted a higher level of baseball, even back when it was the Florida International League. And so basically, I think Huizinga, who really was responsible for the Florida Marlins, he just saw an opportunity. The population was there. There's a large Latin community over the years that had grown, starting probably after the World War II mainly. And, he ran with it. He ran with it. And it's funny, you see some of the same things that are going on with the Marlins today happened back in the old days too.
Speaking of Satchel Paige, as an African-American player, how common was it for there to be African-American players on the teams? Well, they weren't in the major leagues, I guess, to Jackie Robinson, but, how common was that?
Not common. The Florida International League didn't segregate until 1952. The owners felt that if they had black players, that the fans wouldn't come to the stadium. Miami Beach in 52 on opening day had a second baseman by the name of George Handy. And of course, they had Dade Barnhill on the club. When they played the Havana Cubans, Angel Skull was the first batter. He was a black gentleman. And Silvio Garcia, who played in that game also. And Fort Lauderdale, a guy by the name of Woody Means was the first one to break the color barrier in Fort Lauderdale. And I think in Tampa, it was Carlos Bernier, who later went on to play for the Pirates.
But around the country, it wasn't common with other things.
No, and the major leagues almost had like where they would only have so many black players on the roster. Of course, that changed over time. Yeah. The case with Dave Barnhill, was he talented enough to pitch in the big leagues? Probably. But by the time he had, by 1952 rolled around and he was, I think, 36, 37, he'd given up on his dream. He gave it one more shot in Miami and then he retired. So,
When did Satchel Paige retire?
we'll see. Satchel Paige actually pitched for the Kansas City Athletics up until the 60s. He made a comeback. He was like 60 years old. Yeah, they gave him a chance so he could earn his major league pension. He originally had pitched for the Cleveland Indians in 48, and then he went to the St. Louis Browns after that for a few seasons. But he made a lot of money barnstorming and traveling around the country. So financially, he did really well.
Did you mention Satchel Paige's pitching record in 1956?
No,
He was 11-4. He had an ERA of 2-something. He was a great player even then. And people don't realize how exceptional he was, and actually he was very fast. He wasn't just a jump pitcher. He could throw hard when he needed to, like perfect control, and he was a character. He was an absolute character even with the Marlins. And he showed up for one game. He was supposed to be at baseball games for the Marlins about an hour and a half or 2 hours before the first game. It was a doubleheader. And you get infield and do all the things you're supposed to do. This is the second game of the doubleheader, and it's midway through the game. And usher comes down to the dugout and gets my attention. I said, well, what's going on? Why do you need me? He said, you need to go in and open up the clubhouse door because Satchel Paige wants to get in and get dressed. So I'm thinking he's going to be in all kinds of trouble. I still didn't know the legend of Satchel Paige. I just thought he was a very unique, eccentric player and a very good player. And I said, oh, Osborne is going to be so upset when he comes in, and I go in, I open up the clubhouse door, he comes in, he says, what inning is it, what's the score? And he gets dressed, and he comes out of the tunnel, and I'm thinking Osborne's gonna be all over him yelling at him. And instead, he sends him down the bullpen, and he ends up leaving in that game.
Well, he had a unique relationship with Osborne. Osborne let him get away with a lot of stuff because of who he was.
Yeah.
Joe Ryan didn't have as much patience with Satch. And that's why he left the team in '58, because they started trying to impose rules on him, and Satchel Paige didn't work with the rules. Satchel Paige was his own person.
I remember Satchel Paige used to have his nemesis was Luke Easter.
I remember the game when it happened, and I hope you tell the story. when it-
Well, I just remember they would go against each other all the time.
Yeah.
And maybe you could tell the story of what
Okay.
happened with Luke Easter, and I know that they would all, they,
Yeah.
go ahead.
It was really unusual even back then to see this, but they would, as you described, they would go at each other. Yeah, I remember Luke Easter coming up, he was a big, strong, left-handed hitter. And, there are not a lot of home runs that were ever hit out in right field in Miami Stadium. I found out many years later it's because of the wind currents, that the wind would actually prevent the ball from going out in right field. Well, I saw that day the longest home run that I ever seen in Miami Stadium that Luke Easter hit off of Satchel Paige. And as he's running the bases for the home run, Satchel Paige just right in his face, all the way around the bases, and they're going back and forth. And then the next time up, my friend told me, I don't remember this, but he told me that he was there and saw it happen. Next time up, Satchel Paige struck Luke Easter out, and then steered him all the way back to the dugout.
Yeah.
They were going back and forth. I can never understand what was going on with that, but that's definitely true.
They had a long history.
Yeah,
They had a long, probably going back to the Negro.
yeah, maybe you're right. I don't know where it came from, but it
Yeah.
definitely happened.
Home?
Yeah. In case you don't know, some of you may not know. Have you been to the Negro Baseball Museum in Kansas City?
I have not, just the one in Cooperstown.
Yeah, well, it's called, some people refer to it as the baseball, the Black Hall of Fame. As I say, no, there's only one Hall of Fame. There's the Black Museum. If you haven't been, and you get to Kansas City, you ought to go in. It is amazing. I spent half a day there 4 or 5 years ago. It's the Black Museum. They also have a music museum right next to the Black Music. It's a great museum there. One other thing, in your book, I know you mentioned it about Mel Need's perfect game.
Yeah,
This. My cousin, when you read the newspaper, my cousin is short, Dan O'Connell, they had a great play that preserved that perfect game.
I have to tell you an interesting story about Mel Mead. When I was writing the book, of course, Mel had passed several years ago. And it's about that no-hitter. But I looked up his family members and I found his son. And at the end of that game, it's in the Miami News, he said, the catcher, Bill Lewis, I think was his name. And he gave Mel the ball. He struck out the last batter and he gave Mel the ball. And Mel told the press, he said, this is for my son, Johnny. He was only 4 months old. When I spoke to his son, this was when I was writing Baseball Under the Palms 1. He goes, you know what? I still have that ball today that my dad signed to me. And he gave it to me when I was 4 months old.
By the way, I was also at the game in the article, it's after page, which we referred to.
Did you see him hit the double?
All the double.
Yeah.
So I sat at what was right field, it was north, the west side, east side of the north stand. That was right field. And it was a short right field. So I was almost felt like I was in the infield.
I think Tim's gonna tell me the story. I think he's gonna tell me,
Well,
and tell us.
the story about that double,
Yeah,
well, I'll tell that story in a second.
Okay.
I wanted to mention, Satchel Paige was such a nice man to people like myself, who were like 12 years old at the time. He was very well liked by the other players, and they would tease him a lot. And they would do different things. And one of the things that they did that I vividly remember also is we had the stand-up lockers. Like I still think even today, everybody's lockers are still the same. Before he arrived, the other players nailed his shoes to the floor, nailed his uniform to the wall, nailed his hat to the wall. Everything was all nailed down. And he walks in. I mean, they like teasing him. When I found out early on that if baseball players like each other, they tease each other. The ones that don't like each other, they won't talk to each other. But the ones that tease you are the ones that really they like you. They're friends with you. So a lot of guys like to tease Satchel Paige. And he walked in after it was all nailed down and everything. And I'm waiting for him to react. And he doesn't react at all. He just goes over the side there somehow, and then they pull the nails out so he can get his uniform. They also did another thing, after games, there's a big hamper in the middle of the clubhouse. And when you go take a shower or anything, you throw your towels into the hamper, and you throw your dirty clothes and stuff like that into the hamper. Instead of throwing their clothes and their towels into the hamper, they threw them all into Satchel Paige's. So they had fun with him, and he had fun back with them. And the last thing I want to mention about, well, your other story, I'll tell the double, but he gave me his glove at the end of the year.
Wow.
And I didn't realize the significance of Satchel Paige.
Oh.
And I'm 12, 13 years old at the time, and the glove was all beat up. And I'm thinking, you know, I had baseballs and I had crack bats that I would nail back together and things like that. But I couldn't use this glove because I didn't realize again that his significance. And I only looked at things from a practical standpoint of what I could use if I could play ball with it, and I threw it away.
Oh.
That's tragic. Anyhow, the double you're talking about, and I have this incredibly vivid memories of this thing because I don't know why, but that was such a fun time of my life. And the Orange Bowl was configured so then all the fields were short, but left field was the longest, right field was the shortest. So Satchel Paige gets up with the bases loaded, and it's a second inning. And for a while, I wasn't sure that this really happened, and because I said, well, am I remembering this? Am I really remembering this? And I finally saw the box score of the game. I think, Sam, you provided it.
Yeah, I think I sent it to you.
Yeah, and in the box score, it shows his double and 3 RBIs. The final score was 6-2, not 5-2.
Okay.
It was 6-2, but he's pitched 7 2/3 innings. He gave up 2 runs. Anyhow, he gets up. He had a special bat. This is another thing that people don't know about baseball, I guess, normally. When I was a kid growing up, I would have a bat that said Mickey Mantle on it or Willie Mays or whatever it was. And I found out when I was batting with the Marlins that Louisville Slugger will write the name of the player, if he's a position player, like Bob Michelada or Woody Smith or whoever it was, they have their names on their bats. But pitchers didn't, Louisville Slugger didn't make bats for pitchers. I don't know if Dennis tell me if they did when you were playing, but yeah, they made them for pitchers, but they made them for all the rest of the players. So the pitchers, Satchel Paige didn't have his name on the bat, so he commandeered one of the bats and he put in magic marker on the handle of it, SP, so that anytime he was ever in the game, I had to get that bat. No matter it was always in the batting cage, it was not, you know, he's going to relief. I had to go get his bat. So and I wondered, he was 50 years old at the time, and I was wondering, gee, why does he want a special bat? Because he doesn't hit, you know, he's not a good hitter. I found out later that he was a good hitter when he was younger.
In his prime, yeah, he was.
Yeah, that's what I found out. But then, but he took his hitting seriously enough that he needed to have that bat. So he gets up in the second inning and he hits a gapper between left and center field that's rolling. And the way that the outfielders were playing way in. So they got to go back and left field was the longest field in the Orange Bowl. And I'm thinking to myself, Satchel Paige just hit an inside the park home run at that. And I'm amazed that, you know, the fact that he hit the ball. And second of all, he was going to hit it inside the park home run because the ball just kept rolling. And then I'm looking out in the left field and we're on the third base side. I'm looking left. And then I look back to the infield and Satchel Paige is walking. With the side. And I understand, and I didn't know this at the time, but I understand apparently Bob Cruzado was laughing. And the
Yes.
pitcher for the Columbus Ship was laughing. And Paige was that, I don't remember the laughter. I just remember the fact, why wasn't that an inside the park?
I'd like to know from Abel, excuse me, why he felt it was so important to have a historic marker when we stayed in one.
I think, in my opinion, it was the most historic ballpark we've ever had. I mean, in my research, I found that about 156 Hall of Famers stepped in.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, to put that in perspective, the Hall of Fame has 342 people. Okay, so you're talking about 50%. That's 10. And a lot of great players, including this gentleman, who still owns the nastiest curveball I've ever seen. So that, to me, it was a game changer in many ways. Architecturally as well, the cantilever roof and American Cedar. It was designed by Mark Holman from Tennessee. So you have this architectural gem in the middle of our badass and all these great teams of players that came through. When I applied for the official state marker, I got a call and they said it was voted unanimous. So I mean, we talk about not just the home run, but like 450 dead center out the park, everybody voted. So it was Jackie Robinson and it just made sense to me.
Abel, would you share the story about your first experience at Miami Stadium? And I think that's what launched your interest.
I was a wily young lad. And I snuck in. There was a garage door where they used to drink session. And I was pretty much the same size about that point that I am now. Short, skinny. And I used to snake in under that door. So I would go down by the dugout. And finally, one of the, I think within 15-20 minutes, Rick Dempsey came over. The Orioles had just won the World Series the year before. So my first year was the year before. And that's the first time I'd seen Major League players in person. It was Rick and this gentleman and Rick Gaines and Eddie Murray. And Dempsey gave me this glove, his bat glove. And that was it. It was like the fourth wall was broken. I ended up being a bat boy for a few games each year. And so I always say I learned the order away from the men who voted like this gentleman. So that was my first day there. And just like Tim, part of that illustrious bat boy fraternity with Tim and Roy Firestone, who was also known as bat boy. So for me, Miami Stadium was my second home, and that was my first day there. You couldn't split it.
By the way, long after I was that way, I was a Dennis Martinez. I really thought he was.
He was more than great.
He never-
Dennis is a pride. He raised the name of his country, Nicaragua, really, really high when he started playing baseball, and he's beloved not only by Nicaraguans, obviously, and all Hispanics, but everyone in this country. And we're very proud. And I thank you for sharing your baseball talent with all of us. My dad was chosen manager of all-star team in Nicaragua. What year? I don't even remember.
57 or
Year.
58.
Yeah, Dos Estrellas. So my father and I, our whole family always held Nicaraguans in very, very high esteem because they were such wonderful people. So, and you lead the way. So thank you so much. Yeah, Rob? Are we done?
Just one thing, if anybody's interested in the books, you can buy one for $20, or if you want to get the set, they're 2 for $35. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. Thank you for the MPNOD for having me. And if I missed anything, I'm sorry, there was a lot of history to cover there.
Wow.
Today was 30 years ago, this past April.
Yes, that's right. And the pitcher was Charlie Huff, 43 years old, starting pitcher.
And yesterday.
Sam. Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks to Stan, thanks everybody for coming out. What a nice topic, what a great expert, wonderful people in the room. Thanks for being with us today.